I am Johnny from UltimatePaperMache.com, and I'm still in process of making my reproduction of William, the famous Egyptian hippo that is now at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. I think it's been there for just about exactly 100 years. He's not made out of paper mache clay, but ours is going to be. And in the last video I showed you how the armature is put together. If you didn't see that video, make sure that you watch that one first, because when you're working with any kind of paper mache, and even in this case where we're working with paper mache clay, all of the actual sculpting happens when you're putting the armature together. So be sure that you watch that one first. And you also want to go out to the internet and look up William the Egyptian Hippo. You're going to see hundreds of photographs that you can use as models. He's over 3,500 years old. He's blue, he's got flowers on it, it's just cool. The idea came from our friend Brian Divers, and I want to thank you very much, Brian. Hi. In this video, I'm going to show you how the paper mache clay goes on. And there are going to be a couple of things that you're going to see differently if you already have my book, How to Make Animal Sculptures with Paper Mache Clay. The biggest difference is that I made a really wet mixture of the paper mache clay. That was fairly easy in my case because I was using the joint compound from Walmart. It's the only joint compound I can get within 100 miles that isn't the DAP brand. And the DAP brand, although it makes a great drywall joint compound when you're actually building a house, it doesn't work with the paper mache clay recipe, because as soon as you mix their brand of joint compound with the Elmer's glue, it turns into flubber. Flubber is cool, but if you actually want paper mache clay, you want to have to get a different brand. And the easiest way for me to get it is at Walmart, and the Walmart brand happens to be a lot wetter than the more expensive brands. And that actually, in this case, is a really good thing, because the armature that we made in the last video is so close to the final shapes that we want for our hippo that we don't want to put very much paper mache clay over it. If you put a really thick layer, the shapes are going to be distorted and it's not going to look like our hippo anymore. So make sure that your mixture of paper mache clay is definitely on the wet side. You can, if you're using a better quality joint compound than I did, just don't use as much flour as the recipe calls for. A link to the recipe and a link to the pattern are right down below, and a link to the previous video. So if you haven't seen that yet, or if you don't have your pattern yet, go ahead and go down there, click on it, and go grab your pattern and print it out on your own printer. And then come on back and watch as I put the paper mache clay on William. By the way, there's going to be a couple of things that you're going to be seeing in this video that are different from anything I've done before. I did a little bit of experimenting. I always do a little bit of experimenting, because you've got a project going. Why not find out what would happen if you did something that was just a little bit different? Maybe it's a little bit better, maybe it won't work, as quite often happens. But in this particular instance, it worked really well. So make sure that you watch the video all the way through. Now let's go ahead and get started. It doesn't take very much. This is a substitute for paper mache strips and paste, and you know that's really thin, so this doesn't have to be very thick. So all I'm doing now is just putting a layer on here. I'm going to do as much as I can while holding it in one place. Then I'll sit it down and let it dry. And once the first layer is on here, just one thin layer to kind of make everything solid and cover up all that foil, then I'll come back and put any details on. You don't want to do that with the first one, just because it's just easier to come back and do it later. One thing I decided to do as an experiment was just mix up half Elmer's glue and half water. This is something I use a lot with the air dried clay recipe. I don't think I've ever used it with the paper mache clay recipe. And I'm just dipping my fingers in there and rubbing it over the top, because William is pretty smooth and paper mache clay tends to not be, because the paper
Makes just a little bit bumpy. There's kind of a natural organic texture to it. So I just wanted to see if this would smooth it off, and it seems to be doing a really nice job. I'm glad I tried it. I'm going to leave the bottoms of his feet until the very last, I think. Just because I want to make sure that he'll be sitting down very, very flat on the table. Oh, I like that. It still feels a little bit organic-y. That's not a real word. But it's smooth enough for my taste. I kind of like it. So I'm going to do that with the whole thing once I get all the rest of it on there. I've got as much done as I can. The bottoms of his feet have not been done yet. And some of the parts are so thin I can actually see the foil through the paper mache clay. But I'm going to go ahead and do an experiment right now. I'm going to try to see if I can move him onto a piece of foil and then into the oven. I've got a convection oven. I'm going to turn it on at 200 degrees, make the air flow around it, and I'm hoping that it will help him dry, because I'm getting really excited about it and I want to get it finished.
Now, you're probably not going to be drying your hippo in the oven, but if you do decide to, whether it's a regular oven or a convection oven, make sure that you don't make the temperature over 200 degrees Fahrenheit. The reason for that is that you don't want to cook your hippo, you just want to dry him out. If it burns, you're going to get the smell of burning Elmer's glue all over the house, and that really doesn't smell very good. Now, if you don't have a convection oven with a fan on the inside, the fastest way to dry it is to put him in front of a regular fan, even without the heat, because it's the fan that draws that moisture away from the hippo, and that will help it dry faster. You just need to turn him around a bit. I left him in my oven for maybe about 20 minutes at the most, just enough to make it solid enough so that I could pick him up and handle it, but it was still not fully dry. And that's really important for the next part. I'll show you why.
The first thing I want to do is just to give him a smile. I'm just using a rounded tool. A paintbrush would work. And I can see now where there's just such a paper thin layer that I really need some more on it. The paper mache clay is incredibly strong, so it really can be really, really thin. But it has to be thicker than this. It got that thin because I was using the glue stuff, and that allowed me, my fingers just kind of pushed it around and thinned it out in some areas. A little bit more than I had expected. And for what I'm doing now, just changing the basic shape of this face. The glue and water mixture is working really, really well. I need to go make myself some more. It really, you can see it made it nice and smooth. Still just soft enough that I think I can make that crease right here. I took my paper mache clay back into the kitchen and I added just a little bit of cornstarch because I wanted it thicker. This turns it into basically the air dry clay recipe. They're not very different. I used that thickened clay to make these fat rolls right here around his neck on both sides. I used a craft knife after this eye was dry because I didn't have the angles of the eyelids in the same place on both eyes, so I just carved into it. It was pretty easy to do. I added more clay to the bottom finally. After everything else was dry, I put a really thin disc of clay on the bottom of the feet. I pressed it down onto a sheet of aluminum foil when the when the camera was not turned on. I don't know why I did that. And then there was some extra squishing out from the side, and so I just pushed it up onto the foot with my tool, and then used the extra to define those toes just a little bit better. Once that was all done, I stuck it back in the oven. I left it turned on for, gosh, it must have been 2 or 3 hours until it was as dry as I could get it. And the next day, I got out my sandpaper and my little sanding tool. It was a Black & Decker mouse. It wouldn't have needed to be sanded really, except that there were those really thin places where I added some more paper mache clay, and I smoothed out the edges just as much as I possibly could with that mixture of glue and water, but there were still edges that were going to show up once it was painted. I didn't want that to happen, and so I started sanding, and then I went out and got the actual electric sander and started working on it. It still needs a little bit more work, which I'm going to be doing once this video is finished, and I will definitely get it as smooth as I possibly can before I go ahead and paint.
So that's it for this part of the project. The next step is to make him blue and then to paint those very finely lined flowers on him. That's going to be, for me, the hard part because I just don't do flowers very often. I know it's not going to be exactly like the hippo in the museum, but I think it's going to come close enough that he's going to be really, really cool. It would make just a really nice present for Christmas. I'm going to work on that today. We should have the video out really soon, so be sure to watch for it. And also make sure that you come over and visit me at ultimatepapermache.com. I'll see you there.